Right, we're already live for another session of Evolving Education webinars today. We're going to be joined by Lucy Stephens, founder of the Neo School. So if you care about children's rights, accessible to of education to vulnerable communities, about democratic education, about restorative justice, conflict resolution, really lots of things that we care about deeply. This is going to be a session for it. We're going to talk a lot about how to make democratic education possible, how to change the system, and so that more and more children have access to it.
Yes.
And we're going to wait for a couple of minutes for Lucy to join us. And we're going to have lots of fun.
Let me
see. Are you going to invite her directly?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me go. Ting.
Happens that there's this message of you need the latest version of Instagram to join.
Yes.
So Lucy, if you can, I guess it just downloaded Instagram again, or what is it?
Yeah, I think it's just downloading the last version of the app. Yeah.
It's so strange. It should be updated automatically. Oh well. Okay, we'll wait for her a little bit. Maybe we can tell you a bit about how we got to know about the Neo School. So one of our mentors is Derry Hannam, and he's a big advocate of democratic education. He's in the UK. He wrote a book that is called Becoming a Democratic Teacher in the State School.
Another way is possible.
Another way is
Becoming
possible.
a democratic teacher in a state school.
And it was really inspiring for us to read his accounts about how he worked to change schools when he was a teacher in a public school, how to integrate democratic principles and children's voices so that they could make decisions about what they wanted to work on and the things that they wanted to change within the way in which the classroom worked, and the impact that had on children on the long term, because he had been in contact with those children when they became adults, and they still remember those experiences and how it had triggered them to follow certain paths on their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Are you finding?
Yeah, I think that's probably downloaded the app because she's not connected now.
Okay, okay, must be that. And then just to continue with that account, so yeah, it's one of the people that inspire us a lot. He's already retired. He's been a school inspector as well. And as an inspector, he actually. There.
Oh.
Hi, Lucy.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we see you. Great.
Sorry, I obviously don't have the up-to-date Instagram.
Yeah, no, it has happened literally in every of the of the webinars that we have had. The other person was like, "Oh no, they need the last version."
Yeah, we literally don't know how these social networks exist because I mean the apps themselves, because they have I don't know, they present to us so much trouble to just share information. That should be the sole purpose. No, they didn't make it as complicated as possible.
Yeah, I'm here. I've made it.
Fantastic, great to see you. And we actually received lots of messages from people that follow us and in our newsletter that they wanted to know about the Neo School.
Yeah.
Actually to make introduction emails even. So so glad to be with you today.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Lovely to see you guys.
So, yes, super quick presentation for people that don't know us. Luz here and David from Evolving Education. We are researching and democratizing we have been researching the most innovative educational centers around the world and sharing some of the insights that we have had along the way. And one of the most important ones is actually the importance of empowering children to take control of their learning, and consequently they will start taking control of their lives.
Yeah.
So that's what we have been working on. We are also wrote an ebook called Questioning Education. So if you want to know more, it's in the bio.
Mm-hmm.
And today we have Lucy Stephens from the Neo School.
Yep, and we're really interested to know more about your project and about how it's growing and reaching more and more people, because there's something very unique, I think, happening there, and we're so fascinated to be connected because of how you're looking at I think there's something that we share, and in this concept of democratic education, and is to democratize it, to make it accessible to as many people as possible, and to find it a way that this becomes the mainstream. So I really like the name that you choose for your school, the new school, because we really need a new model of a school, and I think you're already integrating lots of the things that we love about, like looking at conflict resolution as a way to learn about those things, or using sociocratic or democratic decision making. So yeah, looking forward to hear from you. And maybe for people to start getting to know you a little bit, if you can tell us a bit about your journey and in education, in life, in the world, and how you ended up choosing to do this crazy thing, which is starting a school, and which we know it's a big headache.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that you really like the name. I'll just say that quickly because we didn't really that carefully look at it, and it turns out there's a lot of new schools, and the kids are now like, it's not even that new anymore. So it's a few name issues actually, but yeah, the point of it was that it's kind of new, certainly in the UK anyway, in terms of it being non-fee paying. So how did I get into it? Gosh, I ask myself that sometimes as well. I was a teacher. That was my first career, and then I worked at the Prince's Trust, which is a youth charity in the UK, for a number of years with young people not in education, training and employment. So kind of seeing the whole age range from sort of 4 up to 16, and actually really resonating with the kids that end up outside of the system, or that have struggled to engage in the system, or that actually by the time they're 14, 16, they've actually completely lost what they're interested in, or and it's really hard to kind of re-engage in learning, because actually learning has become something that's just not even interesting or fun. My plan was really to actually set up sort of a charity thing back then when I was still teaching, but I needed to get more experience in kind of how charities run and things. That's why I went to the Prince's Trust. But then I had a complete career change at that point, and I went into nutritional therapy and herbal medicine and retrained. But from a very, I did a course, a sort of master's course in psychoneuroimmunology, the connections between like the brain, the nervous system, the immune system. And it takes a very evolutionary lens. So what do we come into the world expecting in terms of nurture and care, and how do we learn, and who do we learn from, and that kind of relational aspect of human beings. And that really shifted my mindset from that kind of mainstream teacher lens that I'd always had. And then I had my own kids, and the kind of way my life was going shaped my parenting style, I suppose, in terms of respecting young people and building that kind of partnership-based relationship. And then obviously when they were school age, and I thought, shall I put them back into a school system that I've chosen to leave? And so I spent a few years kind of homeschooling and researching different educational models, and it's democratic education that spoke to me the most. But in the UK, at least, they're all fee paying, and so that didn't sit that well with me. And I thought, well, actually, if this is a model that can engage all young people, that can do all the things that I believe young children need, and then I need to find a way for it to be non-fee paying, which is incredibly hard. And I spent a long time trying to figure out how to do that. But yeah, so that's kind of where we got to. And then sort of the juggernaut took off, and I couldn't really stop it after that, even in the middle of a pandemic. And there we are 3 years later. But yeah, I think the two things that I really thought could potentially change the system is data and impact, and showing the financial argument across the longer term goals. So rather than the short termism of politics in just simply A grades or GCSEs, and actually what does economics look like in terms of well-being instead of maybe GDP. But yeah.
That's super interesting, and I think that's one of the key works that you're doing about that outcomes framework of kind of switching that lenses from what we measure or what we consider as desirable in education, which is just okay, this is the the exams, to what can education be like. And actually, when we ask anyone, what do you consider is the most important things to learn in life, everyone comes up with a similar sets of ideas in terms of values and skills and being able to live by yourself and also to relate with others. But then when we look at, okay, how doesn't translate to what children are learning in the place that we consider to be the place where they are meant to learn the most important things in life? Because we could think, oh, those are things that are restricted to family. But it's like, well, we have an institution in society that it is where children develop the most important things that they need in their lives. No, why not empowering those institutions to actually do those things? And we would love to learn a bit more about that outcomes framework that you're building, and also how you're mixing things, because as much as we want to change completely the system, there's always these restrictions, and there might be children that want to go on to a higher education in universities and so on, and they might need some of those grades and qualifications. And I think you offer both choices, so we're really intrigued about how to do that.
Yeah, I'm sorry if it's really dark in here, by the way. It's not, I don't know, maybe it's just okay. So what we've done is we've built an outcomes framework that without getting really into data, it's all the kind of quantitative side. So when I was looking across research on outcomes and disadvantage gaps, and that bridge between young people being successful in our education system, that's debatable anyway, but and young people that fail our system, that you see key things come up over and over again. You see self-esteem, you see self-efficacy, you see educational engagement, and we wrapped into that life satisfaction, and all of those kind of social and interpersonal skills are really wrapped up in that. Also wrapped up in that are executive function skills, which are all the skills of self-directed learning. And so we collect data on that. When we're at school, that's what we're looking at particularly. Of course, we can talk about attainment and we can talk about behaviour and attendance. We are a school. And then we add research from external organisations for the qualitative lens. So that's when we've partnered with the University of Nottingham. So they did a first year evaluation, and they were really digging into kind of family case studies and young people case studies and the staff experience, and found that actually, perhaps it's no surprise to all of us, that in kind of alternative education, but actually when you change your model of education away from kind of the punitive, rigid approach, and actually allow more freedom and more self-direction and more of a relational space, you improve young people's well-being. So that was the kind of key outcome. Yeah, funny that, right? That's the key outcome that they found. And they also found that when you improve the well-being of the child, you improve the well-being of the family at the same time. And right now we're partnering with UCL to really think, okay, so if an outcome of this model is well-being, what are all the activities that we do as a school? What is just unique to us because we are who we are? And what is crucial to actually make the change for young people? Is it self-direction? Is it having a voice in the school? Is it the particular characteristics of our staff? Is it, the fact that they can choose a number of parts of their learning? So all of those things will be really interesting, so that we can kind of really pull together the key mechanisms of change, hopefully in order to evolve the narrative of kind of education, I suppose. And alongside that, really looking at what's the financial argument that you can make when you really focus on young people's well-being. So that kind of sort of system-wide change. I've forgotten what the other thing was that you asked me. You asked me about the outcomes framework. What was it?
It's okay. I think this was already a lot on itself about all those different measurements, and there might be people that are thinking, oh, but why do they need to measure the financial outcome of this? But actually, that's how you change things at a higher level. How you convince politicians in many cases. Like I used to work in healthcare before, and in healthcare, to approve a new medicine and being paid by governments, you have to show that it's not just that it's improving the life of the patients, but that by improving the life of the patients, they're paying taxes because they are going back to work earlier and things like that. Even we don't like necessarily we are probably all of us feel more aligned with the emotional or the outcomes that we can see, that is the well-being of the children and the well-being of their families and society overall. Those core arguments are necessary to make structural changes in societies, in policies, and so on. And I'm glad that you're doing this, because I think I've heard in so many different forums, particularly in, I think in the EUDEC, in the European Democratic Education Community, the need for more research. And I think there's a lot of research into the well-being of the students, but it didn't usually reach all the way into these other topics, I guess because we all felt a bit disconnected from that, but it needs to happen if we want that change to happen. Yeah.
And also, how are you addressing, for example, the bias and stereotypes and cultural differences that are going to play a role in that, behind the real outcomes that there are?
Yeah, I mean, that's hugely important. We've obviously, I can only speak for the UK, but I'm assuming it's also the same around the world. But, you know, we have a hugely biased education system. We have structural racism built into the fabric of the school system. And that's really, really hard to unpick. And it takes a lot of concentrated focus on it, and knowing that we were not always going to get it right. So it just kind of, there's loads of different levels, I suppose. So it's making sure that we can be as diverse as possible in our staff and our trustee base, that we can have as diverse a student intake as possible. So we're always really conscious of checking our demographics against our local area. We have, so you mentioned that we work sociocratically. We have an equalities circle that literally systematically goes through each protected characteristic and does a deep dive onto kind of our approach and what we do, and gets external lens on that, gets a family lens on that. But I think it's really important. I think the other thing that's really important is really understanding so executive function skills can be very related to SEND, like additional needs, but they can also be very related to poverty and to disadvantage, and things like that are really important to address in terms of gaps in outcomes at kind of qualification level, I guess. So yeah, it's important for us to constantly be checking ourselves, be externally auditing ourselves, and have people with lived experience check us on that as well. But yeah, it's a really good point.
Thank you. And I think that's a great way to address it, because like we have been in some forums about inclusion and diversity, and something that I always mention was the first thing that we need to accept is that I am biased.
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna make biases because I have never lived in a world that was egalitarian. I don't know how that looked like. So we need to accept that first to then be able to start working on it. So just paying lots of attention to it and bringing people from outside to give feedback and recommendations can be quite useful.
And hear many voices, not having those different perspectives, so we can see through the lenses of the other, and that way we can figure out if there is something that we are missing or we are not seeing.
Yeah,
I think also it extends to qualifications, because whilst most of us in the education system, and certainly within our school, do not believe in our exam system. But if we don't offer our exam system, that is the gatekeeper to next steps for young people. And those kids that are more privileged than others, that have got social capital, cultural capital to fall back on, maybe can do away with a number of GCSEs, that maybe can, you know, skip some or get them later in life. But there's some of our kids that can't. So actually, if we don't offer that, and if we're not consciously also ensuring that we do as much as we can to help them achieve those qualifications, then we also build bias into what it is that we're doing. And that can be hard, because I think a number of our families are also anti kind of GCSEs. and wonder why we wouldn't choose to do something different. And that's where we say that actually, whilst we are doing what we're doing with a comprehensive demographic, these are some of the games that we have to play within the system.
Absolutely, yeah. And as you say, like for inclusion, there are some sectors of society that if they don't have those GCSEs, those additional qualifications, then it will be incredibly more difficult for them to access particular positions or jobs that other people might be able to get without any of those classifications, simply because of the racial biases that we have in society. Someone might come up from an affluent family and just being an entrepreneur and start a couple of businesses and then jumped into a manager position into a company, but for someone else in a different background, socioeconomically, that might not be possible unless they have a stamp in their CV. Mostly now that CVs are not even read by human beings. And so, that's it's just and actually, and I would like to know more about how you do that, because that's a key question that comes to us regularly from people starting alternative schools, of how to offer everything in a way, how to offer self-directed learning and at the same time the training that you need to pass those gatekeepers, those exams.
Yeah, and that is a tension that we have to permanently hold. It's and we have to constantly talk about it and constantly negotiate it, because we always have that tension between taught and this is what we have to do, and self-direction, and here's for you to negotiate, and it's a constant negotiation. And I think we go as far to one side as we can as a school, but we could go further if we weren't a school, in terms of the self-direction. That's the negotiation, and that's I think probably for a lot of us at school, we would go further into the self-directed route, but also you can't with the number of hours a day you have and knowing what young people do need to know to pass exams. So I think right now we strike quite a good balance, but the mornings are more taught, the afternoons are much freer, and subjects become optional, or it's just self-directed learning time. It's always self-directed learning time from sort of 2 o'clock onwards. We incorporate a lot of elements like workshops, so young people put those on or staff put them on, and it just allows more freedom and more choice and more ability to say, I'm just going to play basketball, or I'm going to do Dungeons and Dragons, or I'm going to do cooking, or, all those things that just you wouldn't typically see in a school curriculum. Obviously, that comes with the balance that we lose curriculum time. So compared to a normal school, do we teach the same amount of curriculum? No. But as we build the skills related to self-direction, which can be incredibly hard for some children, again with executive function skills, that's what we see as being really the building blocks. Because then as they start to get towards secondary school age, they've got those skills to plan, to set goals, to action, to do their prep, to just know, in order to access this lesson, these are all the things that I need to do ahead of time. Will I use my self-directed time? Will I do it at home? Am I going to stay late at school? But it's on me to own that. And so we do a lot of the flipped stuff where, they might get their ICT work, for example, for a term, and then they can work through it at their pace. So they're covering the content facilitated by the teacher, but building the crucial skills at the same time. So those are some of the ways that we open more freedom, but get curriculum and content through. But it's a constant tension for sure.
Yeah, I can see. I mean, that's it's a big challenge. I wanted to share something, because this question that I just asked is one that we tend to get asked a lot. Like last Tuesday, we did a seminar with educators in Israel, because somehow we're connected with people around the world. Yeah. And we got that question: what happened with exams? They need them to go to universities and so on. And now I want to say an answer that it didn't come to my mind at that time. And that answer is my own experience learning languages, learning English in particular. Because I think I don't know how many years we take in the school of English. 10, 12, I don't know, huge amount of years studying English. And I can assure you that I left high school knowing absolutely nothing of English. Was the subject that I terribly hated. I cried when I was in primary school, trying to remember the words, the lists of words that I need to memorize. It was really one of the nightmares for me. But as I approached university, I did want to travel, and I wanted to see other things and so on. And I thought that English was something important for me. So what I did was I started reading children's books, and I started watching TV series in original versions. Actually started with Friends, originally with Spanish subtitles, later on with English subtitles, and at the end I didn't need subtitles. And that's pretty much how I learned English mostly. But then at some point in my life, I needed a certificate. So I needed that paper that I spoke English. And then there are some of these international standards. So I did the IELTS or something like this. And I just prepared for the exam. Like at that point was about, okay, let's prepare for this test. There's lots of models, we know what they are going to ask, areas and so on. So there was a very different process for learning and getting the certification that I knew that thing. And I think that that's something that can also work, not necessarily the same way, but in schools, just to being open and saying, okay, so if we want to learn about maths, about problem solving, there are workshops that we can do, we can build projects, we can do lots of things, but then there's going to be at some point in your life that if you want to have this certain grade, there's going to be an exam in there. So let's learn about it, but also let's be aware that we need to get good at doing that exam, because somehow it's still a restriction of our society.
But I guess that also the super important part there is that giving that choice, giving that possibility, there is a space to keep loving learning. Because I think that sometimes when you get frustrated through that process, at the end it's like, no, I don't want to learn English anymore. I don't want to have to know anything to do with this subject. So at the end, when there is not that possibility, when there is not that choice, sometimes people get that phobia of learning, and that is like the opposite of that's what the school should protect, like that curiosity, that willingness to learn and to enjoy learning, which is something that we have to do every day in our lives. So that should be protected.
Yeah. And you also mentioned something that is quite interesting, and it's that process towards self-direction, or towards being able to manage your own learning and your own goals and so on. And I would just like to hear if you have any reflections on how that have been going, you know, from children and youth that are used to being told what to learn, when to learn, and so on, towards the process of being more in control of their own learning.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, actually. It's an interesting journey, and all I can really say is that it's totally child dependent from what we can see. Sometimes kids that have been in mainstream come to us and they just don't know what to do with themselves. They don't know what to learn. They don't know what they're interested in. Other kids come from mainstream like, thank God, right, I'm off, here I go. And equally, we have the same with homeschoolers. You know, some homeschoolers that, you know, they come to us and they're super motivated. They know exactly what they want to do. They're off, you know, right, help me with this, help me with that. And then there's other kids that actually really, really struggle with that. They struggle to choose something. They struggle to sustain something. And the skill of the teacher and the person in the room is to know when to kind of gently support and when to slowly build some skills, and when to step back and say, you know what, it's okay right now, it's fine, just hang out for a bit, do what you need to do. But sometimes kids will just fall back into what's easy and they won't stretch out of that comfort zone. And so it is easy just to spend most of your time sitting around what seems just chatting and things like that. But that's the kind of partnership, negotiated relationship. And it's also about ensuring that you know the child so well that you know what they're interested in and sparking things that will interest them, but also as they get older to really support them to develop those interests and know what it is that they need to go forward with that interest. And I think that that's really key, because if you know, we've got kids that already know they want to be an architect, they want to be an engineer, and some that don't, and that's fine too. But actually, if you already know at kind of year 8, I really want to do this, I want to be an architect, but you need to also know what the steps are that you've got to take in the next few years. So it's gently saying, well, this is, you know, you cannot go to painting and drawing and not do that and only concentrate on a different media. But if you want to be an architect, you are going to need to draw. So you're going to need to figure out at which point that starts to develop, or, you know, you choose something else. So I think that's a bit of a waffly answer really, but it's about partnership. It's about knowing the kids well, and it's about knowing which are the kids to gently nudge and which are the ones to say, you know, they're fine actually on their own, and which are the ones to really actually say they don't actually have the skills of the self-direction. And sometimes that's key. So they don't, those, again, I just talk about it constantly, but those executive function skills to plan, to sustain attention, to engage, to pursue when things get hard, to regulate and to ask for help, you know, all of those which are just key life skills. And if those are the skills that we can have kids leave us at 16 with, you've got everything that you need.
Yeah. It remind, when you were speaking, it reminded me to one experience actually with the kids that they asked for help for something, and I was like, I think that they can actually do it, but then they were all the time like, oh, it's easier for me if she actually does it, right? So one question that came to me, or that I tend to ask for kids in that situations, is like, okay, I cannot do it for you, but I can support you to do it, so how would you like me to help you? Which at the beginning is like, some kids are like, sure, I need this and this and this, and some others are like, what question is that? Just do it for me. but it's really good. It's also, I guess that for me as a facilitator, the hard part was actually not to do it, knowing that they can act themselves. But there is also this tendency of, oh, I know how to do it, I can teach them, but somehow also giving them the answer is preventing them to actually reach that conclusion and the exciting part on solving that challenge. So it's, as a facilitator also, it's a really challenging thing to control. Like, you know, I know you can do it, but let them do it by themselves.
Yeah.
Another thing that was coming to my mind that can also help is group decision making or group projects. No? Like when we agree that we're gonna do a certain things, 3 or 4 of us, then there's a certain commitment and belonging to that group that also can support you to keep on going and persevere on your goals, because there's more people that you need to support and that you're gonna be supported by. So yeah, also suggesting, oh, that person actually knows a lot about that. Maybe you can ask. And that way also it gives a lot of power to the other person, because he's like, oh, I know this. Yeah. And it can be like in anything, because we tend to think about project-based learning for this kind of teamwork, but it can also be to get ready for a particular assessment. Let's say, oh, we're going to work together to sort out how to make this happen, so that we all go through, and suddenly it stops being a competition of who has the highest mark, and now it's a collaboration of how can we support each other to go through that hard one.
Yeah, for sure.
And well, more things I wanted to learn about, it's conflict resolution.
So yeah, that goes way, is more than anyways, help me.
That goes beyond, I think, man.
My brain did a glitch, like, what are we? Okay, conflict resolution. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I just something I think that we feel very connected with, because it's something that we experience a lot in our lives. There's lots of community decision making over here where we live, and lots of challenges that people need to sort out, and we see daily that people don't know how to solve conflicts, and we are not used to solve conflicts, communicating, collaborating, trying to find the middle point, or what might be even better than the middle point. And we always that we are in one of these situations, we think, gosh, it would be so amazing if children in this community would be in a school where they're practicing nonviolent communication, where they have circles, where we have some of those practices, even if it's not the adults, because I think from the children it will permeate to their families, and they will tell them, we know how to do this. So we just wanted to know a bit about how you go about conflict resolution and restorative justice in the new school.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard, and most days I'm like, God, if I'd just known this when I was a kid or practiced it then, because we obviously practice it as a staff as well, and it's incredibly difficult. We go through a school system where being right is prioritized, and to try and unlearn being right and learn, let me hear your perspective, let me share my perspective and my needs, and let's kind of come to a collaborative solution, is really hard. It's really hard, and it's what makes working at our school so empowering and brilliant, but it's also what makes it so incredibly hard, because you have it at every level. When you're working relationally with kids, the kids trigger you more than you're not their parent, but you're also not quite the same as a mainstream teacher, so you've got that aspect that you're trying to deal with yourself. You've got colleagues that you work incredibly closely with, and every single person has a different opinion on certain things, and so trying to negotiate at that level. And then we have a hugely passionate and engaged parent body with 90 other opinions, and you're trying to negotiate at that level as well and try to find, and it's intense. But coming back to what we do with the kids, which is also the same that we do with the staff, it's various levels. So if it's just an initial conflict, that can often just be resolved one-to-one with just a mini restorative circle process, I suppose. It's what's happening for you? Oh, this is what I hear you saying. Is that right? Next person, can you tell me what's happening for you? Reflect back. And then, okay, what do we need to move forward? Kids are getting pretty good at doing it themselves often. So I often see this happening at themselves anyway, or a peer steps in to do it, which is quite amazing. And then if that has kind of escalated further, or if it's a bigger group that needs a little bit more unpicking, then we take some space. And sometimes these restorative processes, often actually, they're not just then and there. And this is one thing that is really hard often for the kids, but particularly hard for the parents. They want a resolution now and today. And it's very tricky to say that actually restoring a relationship is not always immediate. Sometimes people need time and space. Sometimes the process starts and you have to keep going over a period of days with constant check-ins. Sometimes the conflict is so broad that actually you need to take much more of a group approach. So we've had a particular incident this week with a game, and the game went wrong. And very irate kids wanted to protest, but there was lots of harm being caused in lots of different areas, and those restorative circles happened over at least 3 days, and they will continue into next week, because even mopping at the end of a circle where everyone will sit and say, share from their perspective what has happened for them, what their needs are, and what they need to move forward. And then, sometimes they will say an apology, and then it's holding that space to say, does anyone feel comfortable apologizing? And it's expanding the concept of apology, because we immediately are like, well, I don't need to apologize. I didn't do anything wrong. But actually, you can also apologize for things like, like the teacher said, I'll start. I apologize for not being there as quickly as you needed me to be when it was going wrong. It was his lunch break. He wasn't going to be there anyway, but he genuinely was like, you needed me at that point and I wasn't there. And so that just opens a space for then all the other kids to say, well, I apologize for the fact that I didn't go and get a teacher soon enough, or I apologize for the fact that I stood there and watched it and I didn't say anything. So actually then everyone, and I think that's the point of where we're trying to get to, is that in every situation, in every scenario, even if you just have a quick back and forth with someone, there's always two stories at a minimum, and there's always two perspectives. And I think that is it's probably the key to what we do. It's not clear cut. It's never clear cut. It's not easy. And it's a lot messier than I think sometimes, particularly parents, because it's hard seeing it from the outside. And as a parent with children in my school, I have my children come home and say such and such happened today, and I'm like, oh. And then I think about it and I look on our system, I'm like, oh, I see what the other side was as well. And then you're like, oh, immediately get a shift in perspective, you know. So yeah, I think, does that answer your question? I don't know if I've just
that's super powerful, I think, to having those different points of views. When you have to hear the perspective of the other person, how did it felt for that person, it's really difficult not to empathize and understand and say, oh, okay. And another thing that you said that is really important is giving that time, because sometimes if the conflict or whatever happened was really strong and I am really emotionally involved, it's gonna be really hard to have a conversation at that moment. Yeah. So it's better to just leave that space, wait, and then whenever you are ready, then you can have that conversation with a little bit more calm and so on. So yeah, it's super powerful. It's true, as adults it's also super hard to do. It's like always the solving the problem comes in, and it's sometimes we tend to listen to reply or to answer to that person, not to actually understand. But yeah, being aware of those triggers and trying to just listen actively, try to be in the other person's perspective, and then let's see how we can work this out.
I think it's
and thank you for sharing those examples.
Sorry, I was just
going
to say, I think as well, where we're starting to really develop is additional tools as well. So it's not just using a restorative circle necessarily, but also scaffolding that process. So, you know, sometimes for neurodivergent people and young people, or just simply because you're very triggered by a particular situation, there's different tools that we might use. So it doesn't have to be verbal. It could be storyboarded for some young people. It could be written down. Some young people feel it much more comfortable to write a letter and share that letter. Some kids find it much more comfortable to share with an adult first and then have the adult share on their behalf, just checking in to say, you know, is that what you wanted me to say? What have I missed? And just those first steps of a process, that can be just as powerful, but it doesn't always have to be just a sort of, I don't think it's even neurotypical, but just some people do find it just easier to just speak and others don't.
Absolutely, yeah. I think lots of us need time to reflect and put our words exactly what we mean, because many times on the spot we might be so triggered, so agitated that we might not even be able to phrase our needs, which is something, a super tool I think that you shared, of asking what are your needs that we don't tend to ask. There's usually a behavior, something that is visible, but there are some needs behind that haven't been met. And when we hear those needs, it's way easier then to find a path forward.
Yeah, first you have to figure out what do you need, which seems easy, but sometimes it isn't either, right?
Yeah, it's not.
It's super cool also to have all those different strategies to approach. Like if given the possibility of, you can write it down, or you can tell to another person and that person will support in that process. I think giving as many possibilities as that person might need is also super helpful to process by yourself and then be able to speak it out if necessary. But having choice there, it's super important.
I think sometimes as well, if you take a sort of trauma-informed lens, like accuracy of recall is not strong in situations. And that's where storyboarding can also be very powerful. So you're actually teaching a skill just with that. So this happened, and then that person said this, and this, that, you know, and then just teaching that skill of accuracy in recall, because you immediately tip into, you know, a different way of recounting.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, that's a really good tool, storyboarding, and I look into it. And in terms of giving choices, because I love what you said about there's no one way to solve conflicts either. So let's provide some choices. What you're doing is really providing choices at the larger scale. Let's provide choices of education. Let's make it accessible for anyone by making a non-fee paying democratic school possible in the UK. And we wanted to know a bit more about how to make that possible, how you are experimenting and being super creative with funding models to actually from the start saying, no, this needs to be viable and accessible for everyone. So I'm sure that's a journey and it's probably going through stages, but how is it going so far?
Stressful? No, yeah, it is stressful. Yeah, so what we've been hugely fortunate that we have a corporate foundation that is really interested in seeding change in education to make social change happen. And it's really our belief that actually, as much as our accountability framework, GCSEs, A-levels in the UK, it's actually the funding mechanism of schools that stop innovation, because it's the funding that makes the accountability so important, because the performance is then tied to the Ofsted result, which is then tied to the demographic of kids that you get and the shrinking of catchment areas, etc., etc., etc. And or you could go the other way and have a private school, but then actually your school is shaped by the will of the parents because they're paying for it. So actually, for us, if you can crack the funding strategy, if you can crack open a window where a school can be funded in a different way with a different mechanism, it allows so much more freedom to innovate. And so whilst our setup and startup funding has been from this foundation, you know, a school is a sinkhole for money, so that's not sustainable, and it won't be sustainable because, you know, they won't fund it continuously. So we, over the last few years, have been working very closely with different local authorities around us who all recognise the need for a school like ours. They all recognise they've got a large number of young people who don't either fit a mainstream school or have been taken out of a mainstream school because of their mental health and well-being, or have never been to a mainstream school because their family values are just completely not aligned to a mainstream system. So the model that we have right now and we're continuing to develop meets the needs of a number of these young people and families, which the LAs know. So they come and see the school, they seemingly love what we do, and then we have to work with them to understand how we can co-create a funding mechanism in order to fund a school like this that they know it as an offer. So we have lots of progressive LAs in the UK, Doncaster particularly, who are really interested in our outcomes and our impact and what it is that we're doing, and they're very good at being able to use things like social impact bonds or outcome commissioning models to find new ways to fund new provision in Doncaster. So we borrow a lot of knowledge from them. We borrow a lot of knowledge from other local authorities doing other things. And it's just working on our kind of closer local authorities to find the mechanism through which that they can fund a model like ours. Currently, we have a bit of funding, but it's mainly through education, health and care plans, EHCPs, which is funding that's attached to young people with additional needs that need kind of a higher level of support than perhaps some other children in a similar setting. Hasn't worked yet, though. So when it works, I'll come back to you and I'll do another live and I'll tell you.
I mean, something completely new, so I understand that it's in the process, otherwise it would have been done already. But thank you for opening that door and for looking for ways of how to make that possible, because it's completely necessary.
Yeah, I think
and
decentralized.
yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
No, I was just gonna say it's a process. Everything takes time, and yeah, easy things have already been done. Now it's the challenge that you are taking. It's a real one. Yeah, it needs.
Mm-hmm.
Like what happened?
Yeah, and I'm amazed by how much you're thinking already about not just building a center that's aligned to your values and where your own family can go to, but actually building the framework for funding and building a framework for outcomes so that this can be replicated and say, look, it works. We have the metrics and we have found a way to fund this type of schools. So now we can do more so that more and more children have access to it.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you for
that
that.
was always the vision at the beginning, and it's certainly the vision of our team now. It's like when we're at capacity, 120 kids is brilliant, and we love every one of our kids that's with us, but our bigger vision is evolving the education system to enable schools like ours to exist in the ecosystem of schools as another offer alongside mainstream, other private schools, etc. Because it does fill a niche, and I think the more rigid a system becomes, the more kids unfortunately fall out of it as well. So yeah.
Yeah, providing those options, I think is key. Also, not to think that's I think another area where we're very aligned. We don't think that we have found the magic key to change education, but rather so many different keys to so many different doors. So let's make them available to people so that we can make the transformation fit for purpose to the needs of the children, to the needs of the community.
Yeah, and apply to each context because each of them are completely different and have to solve different challenges. So it doesn't make sense to have an approach for everyone that has to work in every place.
Which is a very hard message to communicate, because when we get asked what do you do or what's it, that's another question that we get asked very often at congresses. What's the best model of education? Not again this question.
Well, I guess it's hard to.
I do wonder if there's key ingredients. I think that's what I think I would answer to that. Whether I will still think that in a year or two, I don't know. But I think there's key ingredients that you need. And then you need just local context and the freedom to be able to build a school community with the people that you have there that are aligned to something. But yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. There are some key ingredients and some key principles. Like for us, one of those core principles is empowerment, whether we want to call it agency or learner-centered education. It's about putting as much responsibility for learning in the hands of the learners, and many ways in which that can happen. No? But as a core ingredient, I think we're aligned there.
Yeah.
Lucy, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today and inspiring us with what you're building in London. We're so looking forward to visit you in person. So for people who are watching, we're going to go there this June. We're going to be sharing my stories and things like that, a bit of our journey and meeting amazing people like you in person for the first time, because it feels like we just talk with people through a screen.
I know. Yeah, definitely. Come over and see us. It's been really lovely to chat to you. And I'm glad I made this live thing work.
Yes,
Fantastic. Thank you very much and have a super nice day.
Yeah,
we'll keep in contact.
We'll see you in sunny London when it's June. Not until then.
Bye.
Bye.